At the dawn of the 20th century, Russia was an empire bound by tradition and ruled by the autocratic Tsar Nicholas II. Beneath its grandeur, deep social and economic rifts threatened its stability. Millions of peasants, recently freed from serfdom, remained impoverished. Industrial workers endured harsh conditions and crowded slums. The Tsar's grip was enforced by secret police, stifling dissent as revolutionary ideas simmered underground. Discontent grew, setting the stage for upheaval and sweeping change. Seeds of discontent. Russia. Before the revolution. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was a colossus teetering on the edge of collapse. Spanning 2 continents and ruled by the Romanov dynasty for over 300 years, Russia appeared powerful but was riddled with structural weaknesses. The autocratic rule of Tsar Nicholas II maintained the old feudal order, leaving millions of peasants in dire poverty while the aristocracy and monarchy clung to privilege. Economic inequality was immense. Serfdom had only recently been abolished in 1861, and most former serfs remained impoverished, bound to their villages by debt and custom. Industrialization had begun in the late 19th century, but it lagged behind Western Europe. Cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow grew rapidly, but urban workers lived in overcrowded slums with few rights, fueling social unrest. Politically, Russia was a police state. The Tsar wielded absolute power. Dissenters were exiled to Siberia, and the Okhrana, secret police, suppressed political opposition. Liberal reformers, Marxists, and anarchists began to organize underground. Revolutionary ideas, smuggled in from Western Europe, took root among students, workers, and intellectuals. The 1905 revolution marked a critical precursor. Following the disastrous Russo-Japanese War, a wave of strikes, protests, and peasant uprisings swept the country. The massacre, known as Bloody Sunday, in which peaceful protesters were shot by the imperial guard, shattered the image of the benevolent Tsar. Though Nicholas II offered some reforms, including the creation of the Duma, a national assembly, he quickly undermined it, reigniting revolutionary sentiment. World War I would be the final blow. Russia entered the war ill-prepared and suffered staggering losses. By 1917, discontent had reached a boiling point. Food shortages, inflation, military defeats, and the incompetence of the royal family, exemplified by their reliance on the mystic Rasputin, created a crisis of legitimacy. Russia was primed for revolution. Section 2. The February Revolution, the Fall of the Tsar. By early 1917, the Russian people had reached the limits of endurance. In Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, strikes and food riots broke out, beginning with women workers protesting bread shortages on International Women's Day, February 23rd, March 8th by the Gregorian calendar. Within days, the strikes grew into a massive uprising. Unlike 1905, the army now joined the people. Troops stationed in Petrograd, exhausted and demoralized by war, mutinied rather than fire on the crowds. Regiments joined the demonstrators, and chaos engulfed the capital. The Duma, which had been sidelined by the Tsar, reconvened and formed a provisional committee. Meanwhile, workers and soldiers established soviets, councils, to represent grassroots authority. On March 2, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending over 3 centuries of Romanov rule. He passed the crown to his brother, Grand Duke Michael, who refused it. Russia was now a republic. The provisional government, made up of liberals and moderate socialists, assumed control. Alexander Kerensky emerged as a prominent leader, balancing between democratic aspirations and wartime necessities. But power was not centralized. The Petrograd Soviet, dominated by socialist factions like the Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, wielded influence through Order No. 1, which gave it control over the military. This dual power created a fragile situation. The provisional government pledged civil liberties, democratic reforms, and continuation of the war effort. But the Russian people, especially soldiers and peasants, wanted peace, land, and bread, promises the provisional government failed to fulfill. The groundwork was laid for a second revolution. Into this chaotic political landscape stepped Vladimir Lenin. Exiled in Switzerland, he was secretly transported to Petrograd in April 1917 with German assistance. Germany hoped his presence would further destabilize Russia. Lenin immediately denounced the provisional government and declared that the Soviets were the legitimate authority. In his April theses, Lenin called for peace, land, and bread, and the slogan, "All power to the Soviets." His radical stance initially shocked other socialist leaders, but it resonated with a war-weary and hungry populace. The Bolsheviks, a small but disciplined Marxist party led by Lenin, began gaining support, particularly in major cities. Throughout the summer of 1917, the provisional government's position weakened. Its failure to withdraw from World War I, ongoing economic collapse, and peasant land seizures eroded trust. The June offensive, a disastrous military campaign, further discredited the government. In July, mass demonstrations erupted in Petrograd. The so-called July Days were quashed by the provisional government, and Lenin was forced to flee to Finland. However, the attempted coup by General Kornilov in August provided the Bolsheviks with a political windfall. Kerensky, fearing a right-wing takeover, armed the Petrograd Soviet, including Bolshevik militias, to defend the revolution. By September, the Bolsheviks controlled the Petrograd and Moscow Soviets. Their message of immediate peace, land redistribution, and worker control aligned with the needs of the people. Trotsky, newly aligned with Lenin, became a key figure in organizing the revolutionary forces. The provisional government, increasingly isolated, staggered toward collapse. The Bolsheviks prepared for insurrection. The October Revolution, the Bolshevik coup, on the night of October 25, 1917, November 7 Gregorian, the Bolsheviks launched their final assault. Led by Trotsky and the Red Guards, they seized control of key government buildings, communication centers, and the Winter Palace in Petrograd with minimal resistance. The coup was swift and nearly bloodless. The provisional government was arrested, and Kerensky fled. Lenin declared the formation of a new Soviet government, the Council of People's Commissars, with himself as chairman. Power now belonged to the Bolsheviks. The new regime quickly acted to consolidate authority. It issued the Decree on Peace, calling for immediate negotiations to end Russia's participation in World War I, and the Decree on Land, redistributing land to the peasants. Factories were placed under worker control, and the Bolsheviks began dismantling the old capitalist structures. However, challenges loomed. The Constituent Assembly, elected in late 1917, featured a socialist revolutionary majority. When it convened in January 1918 and refused to cede power to the Bolsheviks, Lenin ordered its dissolution. Russia became a one-party state. In March 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed with Germany, ending Russia's involvement in the war but ceding vast territory. Though controversial, the treaty allowed the Bolsheviks to focus on internal enemies. The October Revolution was a pivotal moment in world history. For the first time, a Marxist party had seized and held state power, but the Bolsheviks' bold experiment would soon face its most severe test: civil war. Civil war and war communism. The Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1921, was a brutal and chaotic conflict that pitted the Red Army, Bolsheviks, against a diverse coalition of opponents known as the Whites, monarchists, liberals, moderate socialists, and foreign interventionists. The war devastated Russia, killing millions and further polarizing the society. Under Trotsky's leadership, the Red Army became a formidable force. Discipline was strictly enforced, and former Tsarist officers were recruited under close Bolshevik supervision. The Reds controlled the Central Territory, including major cities and railway lines, giving them logistical advantages. The Whites, while supported by Allied powers like Britain, France, and the United States, suffered from disunity and lack of a coherent ideology. They were unable to rally broad public support, especially among peasants who feared the return of the old order. During the war, the Bolsheviks implemented war communism, a series of emergency policies, including nationalization of industry, forced grain requisitioning, and suppression of private trade. While intended to support the war effort, these policies caused widespread famine, peasant revolts, and economic collapse. The Red Terror, launched by the Cheka, secret police, targeted political opponents, former elites, and anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity. Tens of thousands were executed or imprisoned. By 1921, the Bolsheviks had emerged victorious, but at great cost. The economy was shattered, the population traumatized, and the country isolated. Lenin recognized the need for change and introduced the new economic policy, NEP, a partial retreat from pure socialism. Victory in the Civil War solidified Bolshevik rule, but the dream of a proletarian utopia had already been stained by blood. So in conclusion, the Russian Revolution irrevocably altered the course of world history. What began as a spontaneous uprising for bread and peace ended with the establishment of the world's first communist state.